let's speak to Hennie Van Vuuren, author and director of civil society group Open Secrets. Hennie, we're going to get to the big issue around the Guptas, which I know you've got a lot to say about. But just coming off the back of that interview, I have spoken to the ANC head of presidency, Sibongile Besani, just a little earlier, and he told me that the president has availed himself to the ANC Integrity Commission and any sort of law enforcement investigations. But he's a victim of theft, and everything else is a mere allegation at this point. He wouldn't confirm how much money was taken to the farm. He says he's not party to that information. Do you think that that is a sufficient explanation? Do you think that the president's team is right in saying, look, this is what we know for sure, and we're waiting for the law enforcement authorities and other probes to come forward?
Sally, good evening. I think fundamentally that's just not good enough. The president needs to, I think, set the tone for how we deal with questions around moral probity as the leader of the country. And very clearly, he is a very wealthy individual, and having an amount of cash, whatever that is, in Forex stashed at his farm, he needs to give clear reasons why that happened, particularly because it's quite simply a contravention of the law. None of us, the rest of us, can get away with it. Well, then, quite frankly, why should the president do so? So I think certainly there may be motives behind clearly why and when Arthur Fraser planted this particular information that he's been sitting with, no doubt, for a very long time. And Sally, I'd argue a separate set of questions that need to be asked of Mr. Fraser as to why he withheld this. And of course, that's a contravention of the law itself. If he knew of an alleged criminal act and used it, waited to use or weaponize it when it best suited him and his allies. But very clearly, I think the president has much to answer, and the longer he waits, the worse this problem becomes for him. And I think, unfortunately, it is the way in which this presidency has acted for very long when it comes to these type of problems, is imagining things will just go away. Well, this one clearly isn't going to.
It's so interesting that these two stories have sort of broken at fairly similar times. Of course, the farm gate, as I'm calling it, and then the news that the two of the Gupta brothers have been arrested in Dubai. You've written that the Guptas are believed to have fleeced South Africa of about 50 billion rand. Against that, the farm robbery and whatever may have gone wrong there almost seems not important. I wonder, can you say, is one more important than the other? Is it very bad practice to compare the two, or is it important to say, look, actually this one is more important than that one?
Sally, I think it's certainly problematic because then the question is, well, at what point can we start comparing aspects of poor moral decision making and certainly contraventions of the law? Ultimately, a contravention of the law is precisely that and needs to be dealt with on its own merits. I think we do need to separate the two matters out. There needs to be a clear way to deal with what has happened at the president's farm and the question around the non-disclosure of that theft or it not being reported, and of course the real reasons as to why he had the money there in the first place. But very clearly, the magnitude of the crime that the Guptas have been involved in is something that we simply cannot forget, because millions of people are in poverty today as a result of the grand theft from all South Africans that involved the Guptas, that involved President Jacob Zuma and his political allies, and certainly involved very many big corporations in Sandton, London, Hong Kong and elsewhere, banks, auditing companies and consulting companies that became very rich off state capture. So I think we cannot lose focus on the importance of tackling many of the people that are responsible for this. And of course, the Zondo Commission comes out with its last report next week, which I think will wrap up, conclude a lot of its findings on state capture.
And just a comment, Judge President Raymond Zondo has just spoken at the book launch of Judge Bernard Nwepe, and he spoke about the importance of sticking to the rule of law. And he said, even if my friend does wrong, I must still say my friend has done wrong, and if my enemy has done right, I need to say that my enemy has done right. Perhaps an important thing for us to ponder. I want to talk to you about what the NPA should be doing. You've mentioned in previous interviews that the Gupta's South African legal team is already in Dubai. There's concern that the NPA needs to move fast here. I want to ask you what their next move should be.
Sally, I think certainly they are not moving fast enough, firstly. I think if there was all indication this week that the NPA was in disarray. They were not expecting that the Guptas were going to be arrested. And what we've heard today, I think through reports in eNCA, that very clearly while the red notice was issued by Advocate Herman Cronje on her last day at the NPA, there was just simply foot dragging from the side of the Department of Justice, and we assume the NPA and possibly the police as well, to even provide information to the United Arab Emirates authorities. Now that the Guptas have been arrested, I think what's crucial is that a crack team is assembled by Advocate Shamila Batoy, and that team is sent over to Dubai. The Zoom meetings, which we are told that some prosecutors involved simply isn't enough. In fact, we've heard very little from Advocate Batoy as to what her plan is. And Sally, I think it's fair enough to suspect that an institution that has been in crisis for as long as the NPA has been doesn't in fact have a plan right now. Otherwise, we would know the names of the lead prosecutors who are going to Dubai. And obviously, the immediate question is whether the two wanted criminals, the Gupta brothers, are going to be awarded bail. And I think that's where the South African authorities need really to be mucking in and making sure that doesn't happen. The reason for that, of course, is that I think the Guptas have fled one country, which is South Africa. There's no reason they're not going to flee Dubai. They've set up their own bolt holes in India, in Central Asia and Uzbekistan, and no doubt have money in tax havens in other jurisdictions in the world. So they would be looking at a quick way exit out of Dubai, no doubt.
And our Indian correspondent told us last night that South Africa doesn't have an extradition treaty with India. So should they be granted bail and they flee to India, it's going to be a much more difficult situation. I want to just ask you about something that our reporter Aviu Mtila brought to light yesterday. He's received a series of emails that clearly show, and I've been party to them, I've had a look at them, that around the 1st of March, the United Arab Emirates said, look, we think we've got your guys. We think we've got these two of the brothers. Just send us fingerprints and photographs. And it took authorities here in South Africa up until the 20th of May to actually provide that information. I simply don't understand why, on receiving that mail, you wouldn't run, literally, to someone in higher authority and say, there's a breakthrough. What is going on that this sort of thing is happening in government circles here?
Well, quite clearly, I think it's, the one hand we could see this as some kind of a conspiracy to keep the Guptas out of South Africa. I'm not convinced by that, Sally. I think we would give some of the officials too much credit. I think what is happening is just pure ineptitude. There is no leadership on this matter, and I think it's time for us to say we need a strong, effective national prosecuting authority, but we're not seeing that kind of leadership from the top echelons of the NPA right now. If that was the case, if they were fully committed, 100% committed to ensuring that they were going to hold the kingpins of state capture, meaning the Guptas, the political elites that were involved, and certainly the big corporations, then we would be seeing charges, effective charges being brought against a whole host of these implicated parties, and them being held to account. And of course, in this matter, that they would have moved speedily to ensure that they assisted the UAE authorities. And I think there's every reason also to suspect whether or not the UAE will in fact act in terms of the rule of law, Sally. The UAE is a tax haven. It's a global center for hot money, and a lot of that cash, the 57 billion rand that the Guptas stole in terms of state capture, passed through Dubai, but also other tax havens around the world, Hong Kong and London, etc. And ultimately, the fingerprints of many corporations in Dubai are all over our story of state capture in South Africa. So there are many reasons why I think Dubai and the United Arab Emirates, in fact, has good motive to make sure that this matter goes away. They want to be able to send a strong message, particularly to the United States, that they're getting tough on issues around money laundering. The attempt to, or the arrest of the Guptas allows them to do that. But I am doubtful that they would want to necessarily see a successful prosecution. And I think that is something that the Gupta lawyers are no doubt going to try and use to their advantage while they are in Dubai right now and trying to get the Guptas out of prison.
Thank you so much for your time this evening, Hennie Van Vuuren, author and director of civil society group Open Secrets, saying the NPA needs to get its top people over to Dubai as soon as possible.